talking about Masaccio's tribute money fresco from the Brancacci Chapel. This is another fresco. We talked about frescoes with Giotto, right? Where you're painting into wet plaster, and it really becomes part of the wall. And good fresco artists will only lay down as much wet plaster as they can paint a given day. And sometimes you can see the lines where they wrote off the day's work. Those are what Christ is here, for example. Right? Because if the plaster dries and you haven't painted it yet, you got to chip it away, and it's just a waste of money and time. Right? So they will only lay down what they can do in a given day. This looks as if it originally had a final application on the halos of sort of a richer color, maybe even gilding to show those off, but it's kind of worn off over time. Right? We were looking at the fact that with the Brancacci Chapel, we have some things that really separated from the international Gothic style and that are hallmarks of the Renaissance. The first of these is this interest in perspective that's established by that building on the right. In this case, Masaccio is very tricky about using perspective and uses it to focus our attention right at Christ, who's kind of, you notice how he's sort of like at the geometric hub of the wheel of apostles? You know, you can see Christ being the axle and all of the apostles being on the edge of the wheel around him. Masaccio loves geometric layouts for composition. But the story, this miracle where Christ tells Peter to go look in the mouth of a fish and you're going to find a coin that we can use to pay our taxes, this is all told in humanist terms as a series of human interactions. The tax collector in the miniskirt with Christ, Christ with Peter, Peter with the tax collector a second time on the right. All through human interactions. The miracle, finding that fish where Christ told him he would find it with the coin in his mouth, that's put in the background. Right? What's foregrounded is humanity. And that's, again, a hallmark of the Renaissance, as is perspective. Right? Now, the Brancacci Chapel was a family chapel in one of the churches in Florence that was supported by the Brancacci family. And you can see that they hired Masaccio to do a whole series of frescoes, all showing different scenes from the life of St. Peter. So our scene is up above. Down below we see St. Peter healing some poor fellow, poor naked man there, right? We also see St. Peter in prison over here. Two more images there. Great, you can pick it up. He's always wearing the same clothes. Ding, right? Orange over blue. So Masaccio makes it very, very easy to take him out. Wherever we see him, we also notice there's Adam and Eve to set the whole thing up on the left. The Brancacci family paid for this. This is their private chapel, and was primarily for their use, but obviously open to the public at other times. And in fact, our friend Vasari, who we talked about, I think, on Thursday, Giorgio Vasari, who wrote about the lives of the artists in the 16th century, like all the great biographies of the great artists that got to where we were at the time of the Nicolaico. Writes about Masaccio, loves it, right? Nicolaico loves it. Drawings from his chapel by Nicolaico, right? And what Vasari tells us is that basically it's a school for artists in Florence. Everybody went here. Take advantage of this new style that Masaccio was exploiting, right? In the 1420s. Coming back to the idea of the Brancacci family paying for this, the head of the family, who just recently passed away, his name is Pietro Brancacci, and that's why they chose a whole series of works on the life of St. Peter, right? The namesake of the head of the family, right? The recently deceased head of the family. We'll find that's often the case, that saints are chosen for the subject of work of art because there's a particular resonance for a family, right? So the Brancacci are really part of this new kind of society that we're finding in the Renaissance, this new society that's pulling themselves up by their bootstraps, right? They've made their own wealth, they've made their own place in society, and we get to see them exploiting sort of the riches that they've used for religious works. Now, your text gives you two different Masaccios to look at. And with many of our sort of heavier hitters, we get more than one work. This is a fresco in a church across town in Florence from the very next year. He died that year. He was only like 25 years old when he died. They just hate him for that. I mean, for you, maybe 25 seems old. For me, 25 seems very, very young. And at 25, he was already sort of the show in Florence, more or less, right? And this is for another family chapel, this fellow here, that you see kneeling at the foot of the cross. And in fact, in this particular family chapel, there was the family crypt in the ground underneath, which would account for the skeleton laying on top of what appears to be a tomb at the bottom. And we'll look at that in close-up in just a second, right? The rest of the wall around it is entirely whitewashed. There's nothing much left other than this. This is a shot. It looks like it's been cropped, but it hasn't. That's the wall on either side, right? It's not in as good a shape as the Brancacci Chapel is, at least not that part of the church. Okay? So, we have a crucifixion scene where at the foot of the cross we have the Virgin Mary and St. John. This is not the Baptist, but the other St. John the Evangelist. And they regularly appear at the foot of the cross. We saw them already in that little crucifixion scene, two different crucifixion scenes that we looked at. One in the National Gallery, and one as part of that little portable altarpiece that's now in Baltimore. And in each of them, we saw the Virgin on our left, on Christ's right, and John the Baptist on the other side. Right? There's a hierarchy of right and left, and we talked about this online when we looked at Giotto's Last Judgment. The right side is the chosen side. The left side is often less prominent, and often in scenes of judgment is bad. That doesn't mean John's bad here by any means, but the Virgin has the more prominent position on Christ's right hand, right on his right hand. The Latin word, and even the Italian word for left, is the same word that we use for sinister, bad, right? And again, it doesn't mean that John is bad in this case. So, you'll notice there's a little outcropping of the rock there to suggest Calvary, but the rest of the scene tells us that this isn't meant to be the great outdoors. This is not meant to be a scene outside of Jerusalem, right? This is not meant to be a landscape. You'll notice he's housed in architecture, and the architecture that he's housed in is contemporary architecture. It's actually the kind of architecture that Brunelleschi is building all over Florence. And I can point to numerous examples that look just like this. So he's altered it a little bit, right? It's not a crucifixion scene per se, and you'll notice that the title isn't the crucifixion. It's the Holy Trinity, because instead of illustrating a narrative scene, a moment in a story, what Mazzocchi is trying to illustrate is a theological concept that the Christian God is three parts in one: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And this accounts for why, in the background, you see behind the cross the figure of God, holding up the arms of the cross. This is to emphasize the idea of the Trinity, the Father and the Son. And that bit that looks like God's collar is in fact the third part of the Trinity. It's the dove of the Holy Spirit, passing between the chin of God and the forehead of Christ. So it's not really a crucifixion scene, even though it focuses on Christ on the cross. It's a scene meant to illustrate this idea for Christians that God is three parts. The Trinity. Again, it's painted in fresco, so this is a wet plaster that the paint has dried into. And you can begin to make out the areas where he painted in a particular day. The cross beam of the cross, for example, seems to cut off Christ's head. And you'll notice as you get closer than we can ever get in the church, that Mazzocchi has paid attention to some of the details, such as the blood on Christ's forehead coming from the crown of thorns, or the rays coming down from the head of the Holy Spirit, that represents the Holy Spirit between God and Christ. Even the blood coming out of Christ's side. But notice the muscularity of Jesus compared to the sort of the more spindly figures that we saw before. He really is significantly more built, and I think this is part of this Italian interest in the 15th century of looking back at ancient Roman art. Part of that revival that is the Renaissance. The figures down below, we don't know who they are for sure. There's a lot of guesses out there, but we do know from the costuming that the man was a Florentine public official. We can tell that from looking at the costume history, the robes that he's wearing. He's a public official from Florence, but exactly who he is, we're not 100% sure, because like I said, the rest of the chapel around it is very badly damaged. Now again, to give you this idea of how the difference from Italian art, from this sort of Renaissance, more strongly Renaissance work from the International Gothic stuff, you can look at the basic similarities. John and Mary on either side is the cross, but the figure of Christ now less dainty, less elongated, less elegant. The color is not as emphatically bright and opulent. No great exquisite fabrics or anything like that. Right? And we've also lost these other details, like the angels gathering up the blood that we saw in this German work, and we also saw in the portable altar from the Walters Museum. The other reason I bring this in is, of course, with both of these works, we see standing at the foot of the cross somebody who doesn't belong there. Right? Now, on the left, St. Longinus does. He's part of the story, right? Remember, he wiped his eyes with the blood from the lance and was miraculously healed. But the other fellow, on the right, a Carthusian monk. On the left, a Florentine public official. They get to join the scene that they themselves have paid for, as if their own prayers have transported them from everyday life to the actual scene they're looking at. These are portraits of them on the left with his wife. And you'll see that each of the figures is actually in the attitude of prayer. Kneeling, hands folded. Those prayers have taken them from their everyday life, and they get to envision themselves literally inhabiting the space of the holy. And that's a fairly common thing in Renaissance art. Great privilege that they got was to see themselves there. And of course, anybody else who might see this, life-size fresco on the left, also get to see him there as testament to his faith. There's another reminder to us as viewers with this as well, and that's this tomb down below, because not only does it refer to the family crypt that was originally beneath the cross and Christ's salvation for that family in particular, right? Not only does it refer to that, but it also addresses you, the viewer, and tells you something about how you should conduct yourself in front of this. You'll notice, see the words inscribed above the skeleton, across the back of that little inset there? You're not going to be able to read it, it's in Latin, right? But it basically says, it's as if the skeleton itself is speaking to you. Kind of creepy, right? But what the skeleton is saying is a fairly common inscription we see around images of the dead, and it says, "What you are, I once was." Right? I used to be alive like you are. And what I am, you will be. Right? So it's a reminder of our mortality. A reminder that as we look at this image, we shouldn't just glance away and, no big deal. We should think about the fact that one day we too will die, and we've got to think about our salvation. Right? It's literally addressing us. What I am, you will be. What you are, I once was. Right? Remember your mortality, because everyone needs salvation. That's the message, right? Done. To repeat it, okay, very good. And you can always play the recordings back. I know that the microphone makes it a little garbly, right? But on the Nora it plays back fairly well. We've seen other work on Masaccio where his perspective is in fact very, very strong, right? We saw that with the Brancacci Chapel, that he took particular pains in that landscape scene to include a building that directed our view, and he used the perspective to sort of focus our attention. Well, this one has been so perfectly laid out in perspective that you can really almost map out the layout of the room, right? God is standing on this ledge directly behind the cross. The figures are kneeling in front of it. John and the Virgin, and then other figures kneeling down in front of that, right? It can really be mapped out. And in fact, the horizon line is right at eye level, which is where Brunelleschi and Alberti told us where it should be, right at eye level. And it's just a little bit lower than the front edge where the cross is planted. Right? So everything kind of goes down from that level into the background, just a little bit, right? So it takes into account your viewing point and gives you the place where you can see it the best. And as you look at it, you'll notice that everything seems to be fairly closely mapped out with this idea of one-point perspective, where parallel lines, like the coffers in the ceiling, it's kind of like a Union Station, doesn't it? But without the gold, or maybe one of the metro stations with more color. But you can see those parallel lines that make up those, what are called coffers in the ceiling, that those seem to recede, converge on a single point, and we can bring out our rulers and map it all out, and lo and behold it does, and it's right at the base of the cross, right? This is where, again, Masaccio wants us to focus. He wants you to step front and center, and they help to bring your eye down to the foot of the cross, where you are supposed to lay your sins, right? Where you are supposed to lay your burdens down. So Masaccio is really keen on using this mathematical system to lay out his Renaissance scenes, and that's a relatively new scheme in paintings of the 15th century. No one knew how to do this before around 1420 or so, right? And it hadn't even been published yet. So it's just spreading by word of mouth to the different artists in Florence. The other thing that Masaccio does here, we mentioned with the Brancacci Chapel, with the tribute money, that it looks like Christ was the hub of a sort of spoked wheel, with the apostles arranged in a circle around him, an almost perfect circle that we see in perspective. Here there's a surface geometry that Masaccio uses. You'll notice if you look at the picture that it's a very limited color scheme. We've got this sort of grayish green that is a lot of the stone, and then it's highlighted, and the figures are only wearing sort of two colors, right? We've got blues and reds. And you'll notice that they alternate. So from our donor, or patron on the left-hand side, is red, blue, and then the right side of God on your left is red again, right? And we go to the other side, we go from blue to red to blue. So he's really setting up these color alterations that dictate everything, and even the coffers in the ceiling, right? Alternate blue, red, all the way through. So these altering colors get your eye moving around the composition, and they do so in a geometric fashion. And in fact, depending on how you trace it, I traced it back to Christ's eye because I think that made it, was important for Masaccio. We get, I think, pretty close to an isosceles triangle, which is a perfect symbol if you think about a way of arranging the composition, because the theme of the composition is the Trinity, right? The three parts of God, the three equal parts of God. And an isosceles triangle has three equal sides, three equal angles. So there's actually thought this through, using mathematics as a way of symbolizing theology, symbolizing religion. So with this work, we're really seeing a huge interest in mathematics, and in particular in geometry, but also in perspective, as a way of creating a pictorial space, right? Creating the idea that we look at the surface, but then we look through it, as if we look through that window. Taking what Giotto and Duccio had done and pushing it even further. Right? everybody starts to use it. Here's one of the panels of the second set of doors that Ghiberti did. Remember Ghiberti won the competition against Brunelleschi, right? You saw the two panels both Thursday and last Monday as well, right? At that competition to decorate the doors of the baptistry. Ghiberti won, and someone asked, what does it mean? You get a lot of money. And I said, he had 50 straight years of work. He did one set of doors, and as soon as he finished the first set of doors, it takes 14 20 minutes. They said, okay, that's great. We're going to move those to another door. We're going to have to do a new set because carpets change too much. That's like the law. And the second set of doors that he does uses perspective. Right? He adopts it because it's become a new thing in his 1420s. So the set of doors he's been working on for 20 years, and as soon as it's finished, it's out of date. He has to redo it. And so for this scene, shows multiple scenes from the story of Isaac, Jacob, and Esau. I'm not going to really go into the story, but we see all of the figures appear multiple times throughout, but it's organized by this incredible piece of Renaissance architecture. And if you look at the Renaissance architecture, you can see that the areas that should be receiving to a single point, here's a roof line, right? And here's a roof line here. So those are parallel, the building is built correctly, and they should come to the same point. And you'll notice that down below, Ghiberti has given us a series of floor tiles as well that create that sense of converging depth of space, right? That give us those orthogonals, that was the word we used for them, right? Those orthogonals that establish the three-dimensional space. You can also see here in the foreground, here is Jacob with, Isaac. Which was the fair-skinned one? Which was the Sunday school? One of the sons had fair skin, one of them had was hairy, right? And this is the fair-skinned one. I think it's Esau. This is the fair-skinned one. But kind of sexy, you know? Mini skirt thing. And does it kind of remind you of this guy? You know? They all knew each other, these artists did. They're all working in not that big of a city. Over and above that, this is contemporary fashion. And so they're both buying into that and reproducing it here. Right? But I did want to show you the perspective, right? If you trace the lines of the floor, you trace the lines of the ceiling, you come to a single point. Right? So again, this is that new way of creating space. No more tipped-up ground. Remember how Ghiberti's ram was all the way to the top of the composition? Right? Everything was filled up. Now it's about creating three-dimensional space. This is the Renaissance in a nutshell. In Italy, right, is this use of perspective in order to create space. As I mentioned, everyone is doing it. Fra Angelico. His real name was Giovanni something. He joined a monastery. Fra means brother, right? It's the root of fraternity. He's a monk in a monastery, but also a painter by trade. And this is another fresco, so it's another painting into wet plaster, where it shows the scene that we've seen a couple times before already, the Annunciation. The angel announcing to Mary that she will give birth to Christ. Right? This is the miraculous moment where Mary becomes pregnant. So the angel comes in, again from the left, about to kneel, but caught in the act. The Virgin seems much more agreeable to the whole idea. Leans forward, listening, as if the angel, maybe waiting for the angel to say something at all. There are no words passing between them, as we've seen before. However, there are inscriptions down below. Those are addressed to you. Right? They have nothing to do with the story. They tell you what you're looking at. This is the Virgin about to become pregnant, it says. Another part says, be careful when you pass in front of this, unless you forget to say Hail Mary. Right? Because this is a devotional image. So those words are not the angel's words to Mary. Those are words to you, the viewer, telling you how is the best way to view the scene. Right? If we look back at the Baltimore portable altar piece, we can see again some of the similarities. The hands crossed over the chest, humble, right? Listening to the words of the angel. We've lost those words hanging in the air. We've lost the dove of the Holy Spirit. We've lost the cloth of honor. We've maintained a fairly nice piece of architecture, although it doesn't look like just her throne anymore. Right? She's rather in a building instead. The colors are more muted, although that wing is pretty spectacular, isn't it? The angel is, after all, from heaven. Should be a nice wing. Right? So certain similarities insofar as the iconography is concerned, but certain differences as well. Primarily differences in style. Let's see what's going on next. For example, here we go. Okay, so you'll notice that directly behind the Virgin Mary, and that may have been a fresco of the dove above her head there, right? Included almost as a bit of architectural decoration. But you can see that the Virgin Mary lives in this little portico. So she's just sort of on the porch of her house, right? She's not reading in her bedroom or anything like that. She's in this enclosed garden porch, and there's the entryway to her house in the background there, where you can see the sun's coming through the window, and it's a really clean and tidy environment. Of course it is, right? She's better than most women this way, right? She cleans house. But there's more to it than just my snarky comment here. That window that's right next to her head, right? Where the light from outside is coming through and striking the right-hand side of the sill and the bottom, right? That's the vanishing point. If we trace the architecture, we find it brings our eye directly there, to that window. Now, we saw with Masaccio that the vanishing point was often used skillfully to focus the attention of the viewer on things that the artist wants them to focus on. So why that window? Why not the Virgin's head instead? And this is something that is not widely known today, but was widely known in the 15th century. The window made a very convenient metaphor for the Virgin Mary. People who were interested in the physicality of things often question, how could the Virgin Mary become pregnant and remain a virgin? Right? Without a man passing into her. And what we'll find is this window is part of an explanation, as is much of the subject matter that's included around this porch as well. Glass allows light to pass through it without breaking. And we can find theologians saying this going back to the 12th century. If God is light, therefore, he can pass through something equally clean and clear and pure as glass and leave it unbroken. The Virgin is that glass. She is often referred to as the vessel most pure that light can pass through without breaking. This is the first of many annunciations we'll see where the idea of light coming through a window, light passing through glass, is used in the background to emphasize the idea of the virgin birth. God is light. He can pass through pure things, such as the Virgin Mary. Fra Angelico knows this, and he uses the perspective to focus our attention. As we begin to look around her, we start to see other things, of course. If the Virgin's womb is totally pure, if the purity of the Virgin Mary is a theme that Fra Angelico is working with, then that can begin to explain this ultra-clean porch, the empty room behind her. These are elements that are symbolic, full of metaphor for the Virgin Mary. Her womb is like that empty room, waiting to be filled with the light of God. Just as an empty room is partially filled with the light of the sun. You can even see on the ground a little bit of place where it's lit up a bit, right? So he's using the architecture as a symbol. He's using the setting and the detail as symbols to emphasize the Virgin Mary and her purity at this particular moment. Likewise, the garden behind her. You'll notice that she's sitting on this porch that's within a fenced-off garden full of flowers. Again, theologians talked about the Virgin Mary as being a walled garden, full of beauty, but untouchable, unapproachable, unenterable. There's no gate in that wall. There's no way in here. Her setting is a symbol for who she is. Flowers on the inside, all nicely cultivated. Wild trees on the outside, uncultivated. A separation from that world and her world. So again, the composition has been built up, hasn't it? Brought together numerous elements that begin then to suggest or enhance the symbolism of the moment. This is exactly what Simone Martini did, but much more simply, right? We saw the lily flower, right? A throne and a book. Here, we don't have any of that, but what we do have is with this very simple setting, a number of different symbolic elements brought up. I want to point to one last one. Look at the building that she's in. And you'll notice that it's perfectly parallel to the wall that we're looking at, right? So we have these two round arches in the foreground, and then you'll notice behind her head that the arches aren't round anymore. They're pointed. See that? It's a subtle difference, right? But Georgios has obviously planned to have the architecture exist in two different styles, pointed in the back and round in the front. This is, again, symbolism. These are elements that can easily be recognized by a 15th century viewer, less easily by us here in the 21st century. But they would have recognized that the pointed arch in the background was old-fashioned. That was the kind of arch that was used in the Gothic period. Now, they didn't call it Gothic period, but it had been outmoded by this point. It was deliberately old-fashioned. And as we move forward from there to where the Annunciation is actually happening, we have a rounded arch, which is new. A Renaissance style of architecture, reviving ancient Roman types. So what we have at this particular moment when the angel appears to Mary is a shift in architectural style in the setting, from Gothic to Renaissance. Nobody would have built a building like that. So Angelico is using it to again symbolize what's happening based on Christian theology at the moment of the Renaissance. This is where the Old Covenant, the Hebrew Covenant, faith through the laws of Moses, gives way to the new Christian covenant, right? Salvation through faith, through the grace of God. Right? Old gives way to new at this particular moment. The architecture underscores that idea. So as we look at this, it looks like there's not a lot going on here, right? There's a lot of emptiness in this picture, but the more we realize he's very cunningly used these different elements to really emphasize various ideas that relate to the moment of the Annunciation and the theological idea of the virgin birth. What's also interesting is that the building where this fresco is housed, and I'm sorry it's so blurry, looks so much better on that little screen than it does big. The architecture where this fresco is housed is this building on the right. And you'll notice if you look at how the walkway around the garden is, it's basically this building. It's not just any modern architecture that Fra Angelico includes in the foreground here. It's the actual monastery of San Marco, St. Mark, where this Annunciation was housed. Now, this particular monastery was in the middle of Florence, one of our two mendicant orders, something we talked about before, the begging orders who moved into the cities to preach. We talked a lot about the Franciscans when we looked at Giotto. The other ones were the followers of St. Dominic, the Dominicans. This is the new Dominican monastery in the center of Florence. And Fra Angelico was one of the monks who lived here. This fresco was painted in his home monastery. In fact, he was called on to decorate all parts of this monastery. There are frescoes in each of the monks' rooms, painted by Fra Angelico. There's an altarpiece in the chapel, painted by Fra Angelico. They lucked out, right? They've got somebody there that they can call on to do this without even probably having to pay them very much. He's going to do it for his brethren at the monastery. But I wanted to show you this because I wanted to show you the degree to which this fresco would have orchestrated with its surroundings, right? It would have let the brothers at San Marco know that they too might experience a vision, like the Virgin Mary does. It takes place in their space, right? It's at the top of the stairs. This is a picture my friend Jason took when he was there. I've never had a camera with me when I've been to Florence. But you have to go to the monk's room. You have to climb a set of stairs from street level. And at the top of the stairs is this, now behind glass. You can see Jason's reflection there. And as I mentioned before, there are these two inscriptions in the foreground that talk to you as you're walking in front of it, saying, don't forget to say a Hail Mary as you walk in front of this image of the intact Virgin. And it mentions that she's the intact Virgin in the inscription, right? That she's still pure, that she's still a virgin. And that's the theme that Fra Angelico works with through the entire composition. Now, this monastery was paid for by our friend Cosimo de' Medici, the head of the Medici family. We talked about the Medici before when we looked at those images of David, right? Especially the one by Donatello, but others as well. That was in Cosimo's home. As a pious act, he also funded the building of this monastery in the late 1430s. By the way, for his money, he got a place to pray in the monastery. One of the monks' rooms was set aside specifically for him. If you look at the ground plan, it's twice as big as any of the other monks, which makes sense. It's money, right? I would make the joke, you got a double wide rather than a single wide, right? But Cosimo paid for all of this. So again, it's the long reach of the Medici family. Right? They're everywhere, in addition to politics, right? Here's the altarpiece from San Marco that was painted by Fra Angelico. And it shows the Virgin and Child on a throne, kind of old school, right? But you'll notice the trees in the background look very much like these ones do. But we still have this idea of the Virgin and Child on her opulent throne, surrounded by saints on either side. The saints in the foreground are Saints Cosmas and Damian, who were two brothers. They were the patron saints of the Medici family. And Cosimo is named after Saint Cosmas. His brother Damiano is named after Saint Damian. So for the money that they gave to the monastery, not only did he get a place to pray, but he got his family's patron saints front and center praying to the Virgin Mary. St. Cosmas has Cosimo de' Medici's features. This is a portrait of Cosimo. in the guise of St. Cosmas. So again, for his money, not only did he get his family saints there, he got himself right there as well. Which is, again, like what we saw with the Holy Trinity by Masaccio, or that German crucifixion scene down at the National Gallery. Interestingly, his brother Damiano had recently died, just 2 or 3 years earlier, and he's got his back to us. Right? So this is certainly meant as a Medici family reference. Now, I mentioned that the Medici were bankers, right? Let's look at the word Medici. Before they were bankers, they were something else, and their name tells us what it was. What does that word look like? The word in English. Medical, medicine, right? The Medici were a family of doctors. Up until the 13th, 14th century, when they started to move into bankers. Okay, so their roots are in the medical profession. House and Damien were doctors in the 4th century. A pair of brothers, just like Cosimo and Damiano, right? And the brothers, living in Eastern Mediterranean around the 4th century, had miraculously, they were practicing physicians, right? And then one day, they figure out that they can heal through God's disposition. Right? And they made this vow to each other. Well, if God is going to do this for us, right? We really should never, ever be paid for what we do. Because it's not us who's doing it, right? It's God. So they just go out and heal people for free. This will be an important element for the Medici family. This idea that Cosmas and Damien, the saints, the family patron saints, refused to accept payment for their holy, supernatural spiritual service. Right? How does this play out? Well, this altarpiece was originally a very elaborate ensemble. It had rows of saints down the sides. It wrapped around, came out from the wall. So there were scenes painted on the edges that you could see in 3 dimensions, right? A whole group of scenes at the bottom, the predella of the scene, right? Across the bottom, with saints on the sides. They've again been split up into different collections. And again, we got lucky, right? One of the scenes from the predella of the San Marco altarpiece is down in the National Gallery. And it's the very first scene telling their life story across the bottom. So here are our 2 saints, the same ones that appear kneeling in front of the Virgin Mary. And they are healing a woman on the left. And I've got some nice details. Palladia, I can't remember what she was, what it was she was sick from. I'm sorry, I don't know off the top of my head. It's something that no doctor could figure out the cure for, right? And she goes everywhere. She finally says, well, I'll try these guys, right? Alternative healthcare. I'll try Cosmas and Damien, and they're able to heal her. So, on the left-hand side, we see, and it's kind of, small and badly damaged, but nice perspective. Look at that ewer on the basin, the metal or pewter lower left corner, right? But here she is, about to be healed by Cosmas and Damien. Her handmaidens looking on in the background as they kneel in now to heal her. And lo and behold, because God works through them and because they can work miracles where no other doctor could heal Palladia, they are successful. Right? But they have taken this vow to never, ever take money for it. But in a second scene, we see one of the servants of Palladia insisting that Cosmas take the money. You've got to take a gift. First, you got to say, no, I don't want any payment. Well, will you at least take a gift? No, I promised my brother we'll never, ever get paid. And then he realizes it would be very, very rude to say no. So he eventually says, okay. Right? And you can see his gesture is meant for this sort of human interaction, right? He's got his hand up as if he's wanting to say, I really, really shouldn't. I made a promise, blah, 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 and she's now reaching out to hand it, and he's going to take it. This will cause him a lot of trouble with his brother, who refuses to even be buried with him because he took this money until eventually the Lord speaks to him and tells him that he did the right thing, right? So this idea of whether or not it's okay to take payment for services rendered is a very important one for Cosimo de' Medici, because he's moved from being a physician to being a banker. And how do bankers make their money? Student loan people out there? Right? Interest on loans, right? One of the primary ways of making money. The problem is that in the Bible, that is a terrible sin. We talked about that with, online at least, with the Arena chat, right? We looked at Scrovegni, his father, who was accused of the crime of usury, which is charging interest on loans. So, the opening theme here in the predella of the San Marco altarpiece gives us a scene that says it's okay to take money for services rendered, which for Cosimo has a very, very personal resonance, right? So, with Fra Angelico, we see the application of these interests in humanism and perspective, both in the Annunciation scene and fresco at San Marco, and in this panel from the altarpiece in the chapel at that same monastery, which we're very lucky to have here in town. We'll wrap up 15th century Italy by looking at one other artist who is also a monk, Fra Filippo Lippi. And your textbook has one image from him. I want to focus on one that we have in a local collection, because it's every bit as good, on the right, and a little bit earlier than the one in the textbook. Fra Filippo Lippi, let's start with some biography. As I mentioned, he's also a monk, right? Fra means brother, right? Fra Filippo Lippi. But whereas Fra Angelico was very, very reverential, Fra Filippo Lippi was kind of naughty. He ended up being kicked out of his order, and even though he's been kicked out, continues to sign his paintings Fra Filippo Lippi. Vasari, our biographer from the 16th century, tells us that Fra Filippo Lippi was arrested more than one time on the crime of embezzlement. Vasari also tells us that at one point he was working for Cosimo de' Medici, and Cosimo was forced to keep him under lock and key, otherwise he would not finish his work and go out and party. In 1456, Fra Filippo Lippi was visiting another city to do frescoes in a convent. Bad choice. He got one of the nuns pregnant, took her away from the convent, and married her. Right? So he's not a particularly good example of the piety of religion, right? Even though, like Fra Angelico, he was a card-carrying monk for quite a bit of his career. Now, the work on the right, both of these works, in fact, show us a half-length image of the Virgin Mary with Christ. On the left, Christ is held up by two angels. I love the one in the back. We don't even get to see his eyes, right? As they lift him up to his mother. On the right, he's seated on a little pillow on this ledge in front of us, right? But both of them present to us simply the Virgin Mary for us to regard, to look at. And these were probably made for the open market. There's quite a few different versions of these by Fra Filippo Lippi and others. And we think they were the sort of thing that would be bought on spec. Right? You know what I mean on spec? Like you walk into the artist studio and say, I want that one. Rather than walking into the artist studio and saying, I want something special, I'm going to tell you exactly what I want. Right? It's the difference of eating at McDonald's versus a finer restaurant. Right? A finer restaurant, you order something off the menu, and it's not made yet. Right? Go to Macdo, go to Bernie's, whatever, it's already done. Right? So these were probably made ahead of time. Now, that doesn't mean you couldn't cut them up a little bit, depending on what the patron wanted. But they are there with the idea that you can go into the phospholipid shop and walk away that day with a painting. Right? Yeah. Well, this one on the right, I can tell you for sure because we live here. So, yay. Right? And they're just about that size where we can't say based on size alone where they were originally seen. Right? They're big enough to be put in a chapel, by a private side chapel. Now, if you think about a church, right? A church has got the nave in the middle, and there's a series of side chapels off to the sides, right? And those are larger or smaller, depending on the wealth of the patron, and the closer they are to the altar, I guess you guys will this way to the altar, right? The more expensive they would have been. And something that's about yay, right, could easily decorate one of those around the frescoes that might be there. At the same time, this is exactly the right size to sort of be at home. Right? And so there's no way to tell for sure. We have images of paintings in people's houses that suggest that they were be used and placed in a bedroom, for example, or someplace. You wouldn't have an altar at home unless you were very wealthy. You could buy that. You'd have to get the permission directly from the Pope. The Medici had an altar in their house, right? Because they could afford it. But the average Joe would not. That doesn't mean you wouldn't pray at home. It just meant that you wouldn't have an altar per se. But still, you might put candles in front of it, right? And use it as a focus for your prayers. Right? So we know for sure originally where it was. There's no way to really say for sure, right? So, right. Let's look at the one more closely on the right. The details here, again, enhance the meaning. And the more we look at the different details around this virgin and child, the more we see that each one of them is chosen with the idea that it will bring a little bit more texture, if you will, to the meaning of the work. You'll notice that behind her head is a niche. It's almost like she's in an altar herself. Right? There's this semicircular recess behind her, and the half dome over her head looks like what? Up here. All right, what does this half dome up here look like? Sorry? Say it a bit louder. Looks like a clam or a shell of some sort, right? Certainly a shell of some sort. Clams tend to be smoother than that, right? But yeah, it looks like a shell. It looks, in fact, a little bit more like maybe an oyster shell or a conch shell rather than a clam shell. And this is one of these details that Lippi has included in the work to enhance the meaning. The clam shell, or the conch shell, draws a connection between the Madonna and Venus. According to legend, Venus, the Roman goddess of love, was born from the sea when a part of a god fell into the ocean and washed up on shore on a shell. So there's a connection being drawn by the Virgin Mary and Venus. And it is a connection that sort of makes sense. Both are associated with love, although a very different kind of love. Right? Erotic love on the left with Venus, and spiritual love with the Virgin Mary. Maybe that's why the shell is upended, if you will. Right? Both of them are born when gods came to earth, and not born in the natural fashion. And these sorts of connections between ancient antiquity, pagan antiquity, and contemporary religion were being done by philosophers in 15th century Italy. And in particular, a particular kind of philosophy called Neoplatonism, a new assessment of the works of Plato. And the Neoplatonic thinkers of the 15th century, there was an academy in Florence, like a book club, like an Oprah book club. And one of the things that Neoplatonist did all the time was to say, let's find connections between different manifestations. So how can we relate Christ to facts? How can we relate the Virgin Mary to Venus? And again, they drew these parallels through poetry that would emphasize this idea. So that's exactly what we're seeing happening with what we're looking for, is that he's also drawing a connection now to Venus herself, as if Mary is now the Christian Venus. With this idea of the conch shell, you'll notice if we look closely at her head, that there's a massive pearl on the front of that really wonderful headdress, right? As if she almost is the pearl in the oyster, if you will, right? That she's this jewel in that recess. And he paints her very much in a sort of jewel-like fashion. The other thing I wanted to point to was little baby Jesus down there. You'll notice he's pulling on her finger, and that's something we saw before. Remember with Giotto, he was yanking on her index finger? Sort of a nice, tender little baby playing. And he's a really cute kid, isn't he? I mean, these are cute Jesuses. They're not ugly little men boys that we saw before. But you'll notice the finger that he's pulling on. It's a ring finger, isn't it? He's calling attention to the Virgin's ring finger. Now, she's not wearing a ring on that finger, but that way of calling attention to her ring finger is meant to call attention to a particular aspect of her character. The Virgin is the Queen of Heaven. Christ will be the King of Heaven. They will have a spiritual union in heaven, not physical, but spiritual. And here is this sort of suggestion of that future waiting. That the Virgin is the Queen of Heaven as he holds on to her ring finger. What is she holding on to? His chest? But not really, right? Look at her thumb and what part does she have? She's got a chin, or even maybe below that, right? So she's got his neck, sort of like this, right? Tenderly, right? She's not Abraham with Isaac, right? But it's just, and you'll notice that it's not only just these two fingers very softly, and it's not just his chin or his neck. What does she got? What does she really have her fingers on? What do I have that most of the women in here don't? Adam's apple, right? She's touching his Adam's apple. Now, two things. One kind of funny. In medieval mythology, right? Adam, when he ate the apple, right? And you can find numerous images of them like this, right? As he chose on the apple that God told him not to eat. And that this mythology around Adam's apple leads to us having an Adam's apple, right? That is our reminder of the original sin that we've inherited. Now, she's touching his. Two things. Does Christ have original sin? No, because of the virgin birth. Right? That gets him out of the blood curse of the sin of Adam. So she's touching his neck in a way that would suggest to us that Christ doesn't share that inheritance. But on the other hand, it does make us remember Adam. Did we talk about Christ and Adam in this class? I think I read this on our class as well. I remember what I talked about. Theologians talk about Christ and Adam. Both were created by God without the normal birth ritual, intervention of the Father. Both were invented by God, created by God. Adam, the first creation by God on earth, mucked everything. Christ, the second one, made better. He's the new Adam. We did talk about this when we looked at the Giotto, right? We looked at that flower and the symbol of Eve, right? The flower came from the stem of Eve, and the Virgin Mary is the new Eve. Christ is That's what they call it the first time around, although it's part of the plan, will be rectified the second time around. So what we have with the Virgin's gesture is not only a tender mother-child moment, but a couple of layers of symbolism. That on the one hand, so to speak, right, Christ is sinless. On the other hand, we're meant also to remember that he's the new Adam. Now, we're going to skip out of Italy for a bit and go up north, so to speak, a little tour of art, and look at some things from Northern Europe as we talk about this move away from the international Gothic style. We'll pick up Italy again in a week or so. So we were looking at this Antwerp-Baltimore altarpiece, right? Portable little thing, as an example of the international Gothic style. We think that it might well have been made for the Duke of Burgundy, Duke Philip the Bold, the Duke of Burgundy. And you can see on this map that the Duchy of Burgundy was a huge swath of land between France and the Holy Roman Empire, from the late 14th century through to around 1510 or so. Right, the Duchy of Burgundy. Went down to where Burgundy is today, Dijon, where they make, the mustard, right, and that whole wine-producing region of France, right, after which the wine is named. But it stretched all the way up to Luxembourg, right, into what is today Belgium, what is today Holland. Were all under the control of the Duke of Burgundy. He was probably the wealthiest man in all of Europe, and certainly one of the most powerful, because he came to power exactly at the time that France and England are mired in the 100 Years' War. Right? We'll be looking at other works of art made for the Duke of Burgundy. He and his heirs are major art patrons with all that money. This is the first work that we've seen that may well have been made for him. This wonderful sculpture, as you can see, larger than life size. I took this standing, right? So the feet are my eye level, more or less. This was made for a monastery that the Duke of Burgundy funded in the city of Dijon. The Charter House of Champmont, the Chartreuse de Champmont. This is very similar to Cosimo de' Medici funding the Dominican monastery in Florence. He got monks praying for him. Right? It would also be his burial site. So it's right in Dijon, the capital of the duchy. Originally a monastery. Today it's an insane asylum, which is really kind of creepy when you go visit. Every now and then you hear things that are just strange. So the most prominent work at the Chartreuse, at the monastery, is this Well of Moses. And in it we can start to talk about the ways in which Northern Europe moved away from the international Gothic style. When we look at Italian sculpture, Donatello, we saw that the way this breaking from international Gothic style was to look at Rome, to look at works of art that came from ancient Rome, to revive that sense of contrapposto, the humanity of the scene, being emphasized by Donatello and others in Italy. Up north, what we're going to see is that artists are more interested in the details of realism, almost to a microscopic level. Diving in and carving the figures hair for hair, rendering the faces wrinkle by wrinkle by wrinkle. Less with an interest in sort of psychological intensity, and more with an interest in surface detail. Let's look at a couple details. Let's see. That's King David on the right, right? There are 6 Old Testament figures, one on each side of this hexagon. Each of them is about 8 to 10 feet tall, right? And here we can see a close-up of King David. As you can tell from the dwelling, it was originally polychrome, painted. So the stones didn't look like stones, but looked like flesh, right? And you can see as you look at his face that every detail of the swirl of hair has been carved. In his crown, we have the fleur-de-lis of France. The Duke of Burgundy was the brother of the King of France. And as we come down this beautifully detailed robe with these fobs, these are the ties, right? Those 2 big knobs come down and tied in the robe together, right? Carrying a scroll with some of his prophecies on it, even said down below David's prophet. And on the hem of his robe, little hearts, because David wrote the Psalms, right? Looks like a bottle of Guinness heart, right? Almost the exact same symbol that are used there. So, intense sense of realism to the work. Another detail of Moses' belt, right? So here's Moses on the left, basically. And you can see the notches in his belt, and how he's understood how the leather, after a while, starts to make that curve by itself, even after he's taking the belt off, right? But also then, every one of these folds so perfectly rendered, and every one of the hairs of Moses' beard also tightly rendered, right? To get a sense of the realism that Klaus Schluter is bringing to this work, we can look back at how sculpture looked over the previous centuries, and we move sort of from right to left in these 2 Gothic works where everything's very stiff and repetitive. We start to get more detail in life, and we really move to something very different, and a deep enhancing of detail. And this is what sets art in Northern Europe apart from Italy. Italy is nursing humanism, mathematics, right? Perspective. Up in Northern Europe, it's surface everywhere we look. It's fantastically rendered detail. This will make classic on Thursday really in the classroom. So Schluter is our first proponent of bringing this heightened level of detail to the work. There's the face of Moses. That's fantastic. Look at all the wrinkles, right? Incredibly individualized, and yet at the same time not so much interested in individuality, no, psychology, as he is in getting all of the details correct. One more view here, right, where you can see all of the wrinkles and scratches. Now, you notice something odd about Moses, right? What's with the horns? Yeah? Why does he have the nose up there? Helpful. There was scripture in the Old Testament. When Moses comes down from Mount Sinai, you know the story about the Ten Commandments, right? He goes up, he gets the burning bush, he gets the Ten Commandments. He needs the children of Israel behind, comes back and he finds them dancing around the golden calf, worshiping pagan, right? He gets up to stop. He smashes the tablet, right? They gather them up and they put them in the Ark of the Covenant in Indiana Jones. Right? Okay. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the Ten Commandments, having seen God, the Bible says that his face shined with the glory of God. And there was an early translation of the text that God is wrong, and that Moses had won. Now, by the 15th century, they knew the way it's supposed to read, but it has already become, in the history of art, a way of designating Moses, a way of showing that that's read. So they kept it, even though they knew that. Even Michelangelo, he does Moses, puts the numbers right at the top. But we can find Moses much more simply because he's got the tablet over here on his right. Just see his hand down there, opposite the scroll. Yeah. Okay, we'll continue with Schluter. Hey, I finished City Italy. There is a worksheet like that by Thursday if you're going to do it, okay? Again, it's fewer than 20 questions. So get that to me by email by Tuesday, that's the 2nd of 15. Okay, so again, you only have to do 10 out of the 15. All right? I will see you guys on Thursday.